Hey folks, it's Johnny here coming to you from right outside of Washington, D.C. And today we are going to be talking about throwing in the wind. Now there are 3 keys to throwing in the wind that we're going to focus on today. The first is throwing with a lot of spin. The second is angle control. And the third is visualizing how the wind will affect your throw later on in its flight. Let's take a look. In terms of the first key, spin, when we're throwing in a lot of wind, we want to minimize the wobble that is on the disc, because the more wobble that the disc has, the more the wind is going to be able to affect its flight. Therefore, the more wrist flick we can put on the disc, the more spin we can put on the disc, the more consistent flow through the air that the disc is going to have. That's on both flicks and backhands. When we're talking about spin, the best way to put more spin on your throws is to put a little bit of a dimple into the flight rings with your thumb, get a little bit more of a solid grip on the disc, not crushing it, but just pressing down into those flight rings. That's what they're there for, and making sure that you're deriving power from your wrist. The power with the spin comes from wrist first, and then those other whips like we talked about in my other throwing videos second. Let's take a look at what a throw with not a lot of spin looks like. See how it kind of wobbled and tailed off at the end? Take a look at it with the backhand too. See that little bit of wobble? Doesn't look like a very determined throw. Now with more spin, here's what we're going to see. Coming off nice and crisp. Look at it from the flick side now. Right to the chest. The second key that we're going to talk about is angle control. Now, the more wind that you're throwing into, the more the disc is going to revert to its natural tendency. And this natural tendency, when you throw it flat, is to turn over outside in and hit the ground. To combat that, what we want to do is throw it with more inside out angle, combining that with the spin. Now, the more power that you're putting behind the disc when you're throwing into the wind, the more inside out angle you're going to have. So much so that when you're throwing into the steepest wind possible, you're going to want to almost have the disc tilted down toward the ground. Same thing on the backhand side. With no wind, I'm probably throwing a backhand closer to parallel with the ground. The more wind I'm throwing into, the more power I'm putting behind the disc, the more I'm tilting it down. And that also goes for the longer you're throwing it. So if you need the disc to flatten out later on in its flight, you're going to want to put more angle on the disc to start out. Let's take a look at what we mean by throwing at different distances into a little bit of wind. So here's a shorter throw. I'm going to put a little bit of inside out angle on it because we still are throwing into some wind, but not quite as much as I would put on a huck. Same thing with the backhand, 10 to 15 yards. Perfect. Now if we didn't do that and we threw into wind, let's take a quick look at what it would look like. See the wind affecting that disc's natural tendency? Now let's take a look at some longer throws and the angle that I'm putting on those. So Rowan's backing up to about 30, 40 yards, and we're going to take a look at how the throws are affected by the angle. We want it flat right at the end there, tailing a little bit outside in at the end of its flight. Look how that started out with a lot of angle, but flattened out because the wind is trying to push it back to revert to its natural tendency of turning over outside in. And then the third key that we're going to talk about with throwing in the wind, which is a little bit of a higher level tip, is visualizing how the throw is going to turn over at the end of its flight. And what I mean by this is what you just saw with our throwing examples. Now, if I'm going to think I need to throw it straight at Rowan, with the wind as it is, it's going to turn over and hit, as we see here, a little bit right of where I want to go. Same thing with the flick. If I want to throw it straight at Rowan and I'm thinking that, it would tail a little bit left at the end of its flight. Let's take a look at what I mean. So throwing it straight at Rowan, not visualizing the path. Look how that finishes right. Same thing with the flick. If I'm throwing it straight at Rowan, but I don't take into account how it's going to tail off at the end of its flight, here's what happens. See how much farther left that went? And this happens the farther that you're throwing the disc, so imagine how that would look on a 40 to 50 yard huck. These are the kind of tips that make it a lot easier on your receiver if you can get them right. So, with that knowledge, where would I want to aim if I actually want to hit Rowan in stride when I'm throwing a flick? Right, we want to aim a little bit to the right because we know it's going to tail left regardless of how much angle we put on it when we're throwing into the wind. See how that curves over, hits him right in his breadbasket after tailing outside in? Same thing with the backhand. I want to visualize the disc tailing a little bit outside in, so tailing a little bit to the right, and therefore I'm going to aim a little bit to my left. Let's take a look. Nice. Curving right back in. Those are my tips on how to throw in the wind. I hope that these can make you a little bit more comfortable the next time you're out on the field in a windy situation, and that ultimately they help you grow. Peace.